Hello and welcome to this presentation about unhacking the Oracle database. We're going to focus on protecting data in an Oracle database, so the reverse of hacking, hence the title Unhacking an Oracle Database. Hello from New York in the north of England. I'm recording this, pre-recording this. I was originally going to do this talk live over webex for the conference in Ljubljana, but obviously because of coronavirus I'm now pre-recording this as are other presenters of this conference, so it's nice to still be part of this process, but it would be nice if it was live and people could actually ask questions at the end, but that's unfortunately not going to happen. A little bit about me. I only focus on Oracle security. I've been doing this for almost 20 years. I do security audits. I help people design audit trails. I help people secure their Oracle databases. I help people do secure coding. I do training, and we also sell software products in this space to help people secure and protect the data in their Oracle databases. So anything Oracle security related. So today I'm going to focus on unhacking the Oracle database. So I'm going to talk about these subjects. So initially just about data theft, because that's the clear thing that we're focusing on. An Oracle database stores data. We want to make sure that data can't be stolen. We're going to talk about why it's complicated to secure an Oracle database. We're going to talk about the difference between traditional patching and hardening and data security, so that the two things can be done to an Oracle database. And we're going to talk about legacy applications. They don't help us because we don't, as customers of the legacy applications, we don't control the application or the source code. We can't fix them. We're just limited in using them. We're going to talk about designing with security in mind, data security in mind, and we're going to talk about testing the Oracle database for security issues. Data breaches first. If we go back about 5 years, then a data breach was not really mainstream news. You know, the BBC used to get an expert to come on and talk about the terms of a data breach, to talk about the technical terms, to explain it to the listeners, because no one really understood what it was. At least the BBC felt they didn't understand what it was. GDPR was made law across Europe from May 2018. In much more recent times, the BBC doesn't bring an expert in anymore. The main newsreader talks about data breaches. They seem to be happening all the time. The BBC even has its own data breach section of its website where it lists data breaches that have occurred. So it's a mainstream subject. Everyone knows about data breach, and this is the thing that we're trying to solve with securing an Oracle database. We're trying to protect the data in an Oracle database. So this is very relevant. There have been some huge fines. So the ICO, the regulatory body in the UK, I'm talking purely about the UK here, each of the member states should have their own version of this. They have brought in some enormous fines. These are way, way bigger than anything that occurred under the original data protection laws. So British Airways was fined 183 million. The Marriott Group, the Starwood Group, who owns the Marriott Hotel, were fined 99 million pounds last year. This is enormous, and this is because they lost 339 million records from their database. What's really interesting is that the Starwood Group is one of Oracle's example customers on Oracle's own website. So we know that the Starwood Group and the breach is an Oracle database. We know this because Oracle shows Starwood Group as one of its example customers. So that's interesting to know that, you know, this subject is general. You know, data breaches are general, but we know in this particular case that this is about Oracle. So that's really interesting for me. If we want to secure an Oracle database, the problem is that Oracle is not an operating system. So, you know, securing Windows or securing Linux or Solaris is not trivial, but it's much, much simpler than securing an Oracle database. You generally will lock down parameters, remove services, you remove default accounts, you will you know, do basic things that are listed in such nice documents as the CIS benchmark for Linux or Windows or Solaris. With Oracle, we can still do these things, but there is an enormous amount of these things that are possible to do. I can't list everything in quite a short talk, but you know, Oracle don't make it easy for us to secure the Oracle database or to secure data in the Oracle database. The database is huge and complex. It's an enormous piece of software. Some examples on this slide here, from 12C, 18C, 19C, 20C is just about to become released as well to the public. So by the time maybe you hear this, maybe 20C is actually available. There are 45,000 public grants in a 12, 18, 19C database. This means any single user of the database who has an account to log into the database can do 45,000 things, and there is no way automatically or easily to turn this off. You can go in and remove these if you want to, but it's an enormous task and it's very difficult and time consuming. There are an enormous amount of defaults. There are 35 to 54 default accounts. Such a huge difference is based on whether the database is multi-tenant or not. So this is a new feature that was brought out in 12C, whereby you can have, in effect, a database container that can hold other databases, so-called pluggable databases. If we look at the traditional default accounts in any standard normal Oracle database, there's been about 35 from Oracle 9, 10, 11, 12, and so on. There's 35 usually default accounts. But because of multi-tenant, we actually get a difference of 54 accounts, because there are some accounts that are in the root container, the actual container that holds the pluggable databases, and there are some accounts created as defaults in the pluggable databases themselves. That's an enormous amount of default users, but also default functionality. The Oracle database contains these accounts, and these accounts hold functionality and data. This functionality and data is generally available to users of the database through the public grants that I mentioned in the previous bullet. So this makes the task of securing the sort of core Oracle database very difficult. Oracle is relatively open by default. There are 5,000 parameters that you can set. Obviously, not all of them are security. I know of about 60 to 80 parameters that are strongly security or less strongly security in the database. That's an enormous amount of things you can change and set. That's just basic settings. And then you bring in the accounts, the users, the data that you create, the tables, the views, the procedures, the triggers, and everything else, and they can all have many, many different granted permissions on them. So you can grant, read, select, insert, update, delete on a table. You can grant execute, debug, whatever on a procedure. If you combine this with an application such as the Business Suite that has got hundreds of thousands of tables and procedures, that's millions of possibilities of parameters and settings in the database. My experience is most Oracle databases are deployed to an open network. In other words, a flat, non-segmented network architecture. It's traditional that companies put their Oracle database in the network, and any user, any company employee who's got a desktop computer can potentially connect to the Oracle database. So that doesn't help. So basically lots and lots of people can get to them. My experience of performing security audits is that we always talk about least rights. Unfortunately, in Oracle databases, we normally see most rights. So you get applications where all of the code and all of the data is in one database schema. This means there is no permissions, there is no security. We also see DBA role being granted to the owner of all the data and all the code. So if you exploit an application flaw to do SQL injection, you have absolute free roaming rights of the whole database. So Oracle is big and Oracle is complicated. GDPR we talked about a few minutes ago. GDPR is really a useful tool in terms of driving the need to secure an Oracle database. So before GDPR, we didn't really have any regulatory laws here in the UK that forced people to start doing data security. That's because we had things like PCI for credit cards, but most of the other laws were American laws, so things like Sarbanes-Oxley, HIPAA, and so on. GDPR is now our law. It's in Europe. We have to start to look at this, and it's a complex document. Over 100 pages, 11 chapters, 99 articles, equivalent number and more of recitals, the notes. There is an enormous amount of content in it, but at a very, very high level quick summary, GDPR is saying to us we must have data security by design and by default. This means you need to actually design data security into your Oracle database, it needs to be documented and designed, and it needs to be turned on. GDPR also doesn't actually explicitly say you need an audit trail, but that's what it means. We have to be able to tell the Information Commissioner that our database has been breached within 72 hours. We're never going to know that unless we've got an audit trail that is detecting attacks against the database, and we can understand if somebody's done it. We also have to tell the customers if their data was stolen. That again speaks to us about audit trails. We have some additional interesting things like the right to be forgotten. This means we have to start thinking about backup tapes. We have to understand how Oracle stores data and how it deletes it. So if somebody says, I want to be forgotten, we need to be able to do that in an Oracle database. So GDPR is very interesting, and it is a very current driver for doing something about data security in a database. My current thinking about securing data in Oracle database is this. I ask people at conferences, I ask people on training classes, I ask customers when I go and see them, where do you think you are? Are you 0% secure? Are you 100% secure? It's impossible to be 100% secure. It's probably impossible to be 0% secure. Most people tell me that they're 60%, 80% secure. Actually, when I look at their database, when I've done a security audit, they're probably 0 to 30%. That's because they haven't really done anything. Their database is sitting on an internal network. It's accessible by any user of the network, so any person who's got a desktop computer, they could attempt to connect to the database. It's still got default accounts. Most passwords can be guessed. There is no evidence of security, no evidence of controls around users. There's no evidence of controls around data. There's no password management. All of these elements are missing. So most people are in the sort of 0 to 30% bracket. A small number of sites that I've worked with may be higher, maybe even as high as 60%. Because they've developed a data security policy, they've implemented audit trails, they've implemented patching, they've tried to implement strong password controls, they've tried to implement controls around data access controls, even context-based security on data controls. So they've done something, but that is very few and far between, unfortunately. I see a reliance still in companies on traditional security. So I go to sites and they say, well, we've got really good network controls. We don't allow internet access. We've got really good physical controls. And I've been to some sites where they've got razor wire near the gate where you go in. They've got these very tight turnstiles to get in. They've got good physical security, but their data security is usually not very good. They've usually got good network security. So they've thought about firewalls. They've thought about segmented architecture. They've got antivirus. They may be using Active Directory, but they haven't done anything to secure the database. I see a big focus on things like the CIS benchmark. That document, it's okay, but it's about patching and hardening the database. And these are very basic, simple things in the CIS benchmark. It's also very out of date. So if you compare the 11G CIS benchmark with the 12C, there's very little difference. And also if you look at these documents, there's lots of things missing. There's no 12C, there's no 18C, there's no pluggable databases, there's no ASM. They're too small, these documents. Also, they're supposedly a consensus, but the consensus is too small. There's a list of people that fits in a short section, and there's a very small number of people who are actually contributing to these documents. Let's not decry people putting some effort in and doing this, but I don't think it's good enough. And patching and hardening isn't the right thing to do to secure your Oracle database. I see other companies who are buying tick boxes. Oracle sell them TDE, Oracle sell them Database Vault, Oracle sell them Audit Vault, and so on. They're ticking a box, but actually they haven't done any work to secure the core Oracle database. And to me, that's crazy. If you haven't secured your basic setup first, there is no real advantage in buying these cost options. And don't get me wrong, I like these cost options, I like these products, they're good products. But you should implement these after you've done the core data security yourself. So Oracle has this sort of complex battle between free and cost. There's an enormous amount of things you can do to the Oracle database for free. You can create password controls, you can have audit trails, you can design your security around your database tables, your procedures. You can do all of that, and you can do that for free. But the things that are nice and are really around the data security, so row level security, context-based security, identity, these are all cost options that you need to pay extra to Oracle to have these. So products like database vault, label security, redaction, TDE, and so on. So Oracle has this sort of battle between free. We could do a lot with free, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. And to get the really good security, you have to pay extra cost on top of your Enterprise Edition license. But you shouldn't do that until you've done the basic free things. So I perform security audits of Oracle databases regularly. I see, as I said in the slide about the percentage, I see a generally similar level of lack of security across all verticals. Pharmaceutical, retail, finance, government, they're all very similar. And one of the biggest threats is that the security is not a default in Oracle. There is no real way to say give me a secure Oracle database out of the box, because it doesn't work like that. The Oracle database is a generic engine. You design your procedures, you design your tables, your views, your code, and you're supposed to design the security, but people don't. This is the problem. They're not implemented. The security things are not implemented. This makes the Oracle database a threat, because it's easy to exploit it if you know what you're doing. So some of the things I see, lack of patching. People are not patching. They're still not patching after 15 years of regular patches. I see legacy applications with bad design. All of the data, all of the code in one massive, humongous schema, and it's impossible to create grants between them. Legacy, we still see this now, 25-year-old applications. I see a lack of data security in applications. Everyone assumes that the application controls the security to the data because of menus and forms and people being able to go to a certain screen to access certain data. And then they forget that half of the employees of the company can connect directly to the database, and that security is not there because it's not in the database. You can't rely on the application to do security. There's often too much reliance on physical and network security, but the database is open and on the internal network, and all of your employees have got the tools and they know the data, they know what to steal. And the biggest problem, the last point on the slide, is there's usually no budget to do data security. So it's very difficult because the DBAs, the application developers, are spending all the time designing the functionality. They're not spending the time on securing the data, but they should be. GDPR tells us now that that is the case. So I see, weak passwords. I saw a database, fairly recently. The system password hadn't been changed for 14 years, and it was 5 characters long. I see a lack of any audit trail in the database at the database level. I see applications installed that you don't need. So like Oracle Apex installed, but there's no Apex application. We mentioned the 45,000 public grants. I see no separation. I see no grants being made. I see applications being granted DBA role. I see, objects that have been granted with the grant option. Most applications I look at have most privilege, not least privilege. There's an absolute lack of focus on data security design. That's the key thing we need. There's companies who focus on patching and hardening, fine, but it doesn't really secure your data. We need to focus on data security. So most sites focus on functionality, service level agreements, performance, retrofitting security to a COTS, custom off-the-shelf application like eBusiness Suite or SAP or PeopleSoft is difficult because it's not yours. You can't change it. It's difficult to actually fix something that doesn't belong to you. Security often can't be measured in advance. There's no budget to spend money on a lot of work to secure an Oracle database because there's no reason to do it. There is a reason for performance, but there isn't a reason to do it. In essence, security is insurance. Try selling insurance to people. It's difficult. I'm hoping GDPR changes this. There is a move to the cloud. Oracle and others have got a massive push to the cloud. Oracle, everything you deal with Oracle nowadays has got cloud involved with it. I see a small number of people starting to look at putting databases in the cloud. But if you think about it, an insecure database on premises is still insecure when you put it in the cloud. Oracle and others will tell you it's more secure in the cloud. Well, elements of the cloud are more secure. You've got more control over it, maybe, but the actual data security design in the database is still insecure, and putting it in the cloud doesn't magically make it secure. You still need to do that work, unfortunately. When we secure an Oracle database, we need to separate into three sections. Patching, hardening, just a traditional security. So you apply the security patches, you do the general hardening, you remove the defaults, you change the parameters, you revoke a few grants of privileges and so on. Those are the basic things, but they don't secure the actual data. So they probably consist of 10%, 30% of the total of securing an Oracle database. The 60% is the data security, so the user controls, the user privileges, the data access controls, the access controls to the database itself. That's the bit that's hard, that's the bit that's usually not done. People don't do encryption, they don't do data obfuscation, they don't do data security. That's the problem we need to solve. We need to build onion layers with an Oracle database. We need to focus on data security. That is the key thing. We're not trying to secure Oracle, we're trying to secure data that is in an Oracle database. We shouldn't forget the hardening and patching, we should still do it, but we should focus on data security. We should spend most of our money on actually doing data security. So we need to stop people connecting to the database. So use network controls, traditional firewalls, use the Oracle valid node checking, so the internal, very simple Oracle TNS level firewall. We can use things like triggers, so logon triggers, to limit the applications that can connect to the database. So we can limit people based on IP address, tools that are being used, and so on. We should then build strong password controls, have everyone who is allowed to connect, so we control who can connect, have everyone have a strong password management. We then should build a strong audit trail to understand what is going on in the database. Then we need to build least rights for every account that still exists in the database. Every account should only have the right privileges to do their job. Then we should separate the data and the users. So don't connect every end user to the database as the owner of the data. That means there's no security. So separate data schema, separate code schema, separate connection user. Build security around the application data. This is data security. And then when you've done that, you can start to think about data access controls, context-based security, and so on. If you don't secure your data, you're probably going to go bankrupt at some point. That's if coronavirus doesn't make us all bankrupt before that. GDPR, certainly in the UK, they're throwing £99 million fines at Marriott Group. And Marriott is in every one of the 28 states of the EU, as far as I know. So they could get fined by every information commissioner across the whole of the EU. A company could easily go bankrupt because they don't make the effort to secure data. There's been this driver to have a legal contract, that people are saying GDPR is a legal contract. Yes, it is, but having a legal contract that somebody ticks on a website doesn't stop somebody stealing your data. If you hire a pen testing company to come and do a pen test of your website, they will not drill into the database. They will not find or understand the security issues in the database itself. So I do security audits of Oracle. I usually find more than 200 issues in every database. And if you've got 1,000 databases and 200 issues, that's 200,000 things to fix. So you can't fix all of those things. You have to build realistic and achievable security for data. So things we talked about in the previous slide. Build these onion layers. Stop people connecting. Have network controls, database network controls. Have strong password management. Have user controls, least rights, data access controls, and then build context-based security on top of that. That's what you need to aim for to secure your Oracle database. So quick mention of tools. So we sell a tool that's in the slide here, PFCL Scan. This tool can be used to perform a security audit of your Oracle database or many Oracle databases. It's quick and simple to use. You simply create a new project, you add the database connection details, you need a limited account with limited rights, You run a scan, takes a couple of minutes, and you can produce a high-level single-page report, which is on the right-hand side of this slide, which will give you a high-level view of the score of your database, or you can run a full detailed report, which will give you every single issue that we have looked for in the database. So we check about 1,200 things in an Oracle database. Palsit, the hosts of this conference, are our reseller in the Balkans region. If you would like a demonstration of this scanner, I'm happy to do that, either through Palsit or directly with myself, and happy to demonstrate the product and show you how easy it is to look at your Oracle databases, to understand what you need to do to secure all of your Oracle databases. And that's it. So 5 takeaways. I always like to do 5 takeaways. Oracle is very complex and very open by default. Hardening and patching, which is traditional for operating systems, doesn't really work with an Oracle database, but we shouldn't ignore it. We have to focus on data security first and last. That is what we're trying to do. We're trying to secure data in the database. This leads us, because of the complexity, to focus on onion layers. We need to prevent people connecting. Those tools and people we let through, they have to have strong passwords, password controls, they have to have least rights, they have to only be able to do exactly what they should be able to do in the database. And finally, we need to use automated tools to continually test the security of our Oracle databases. It's difficult to do it manually. Automation is a really good way, and PFCL scan is a great tool to do that. Thank you very much. Obviously this is a recorded talk. I think I've talked for about 30 minutes. If you've got any questions, you can either fire them through Palsit or you can send me an email, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.